In late March, soon after President Ramaphosa announced several measures to limit the spread of coronavirus in the country, the South African Cultural Observatory undertook a study to evaluate the impact of COVID-19 and associated measures on the cultural and creative industry, CCIs. This took the form of both an online survey and an economic impact assessment to find out what impact these measures were having on businesses and freelancers in the sector, and the adaptation strategies and the most useful kinds of support that could be provided. The study, said to be the most comprehensive for the sector, was undertaken between March the 30th and May the 4th, 2020, and provides an early assessment of the impact of the shutdown on the sector. The study shows a direct impact on total output of the COVID-19 shutdown on the sector to be just over 53 billion rand. For more on the survey, we're joined via Zoom by Professor Jen Snowball, the SA Cultural Observatory Chief Research Strategist and Economics Professor at Rhodes University. Professor Snowball, a very good morning, and thank you so much for making the time.
Thank you for having me on the program.
The South African Cultural Observatory conducted a survey on the impact of COVID-19 and related measures on the cultural and creative industries. Perhaps before you tell us about the findings of the survey, can you tell us a bit more about the South African Cultural Observatory? Who do you represent?
So the South African Cultural Observatory is a research organization. It's connected to 4 universities. So that's the Nelson Mandela University that leads, Rhodes University, University of Fort Hare, and the University of KwaZulu-Natal. And it's funded by the Department of Sports, Arts and Culture. And our mandate is to provide policy-relevant, up-to-date information about what's happening in the creative economy of South Africa.
Now tell us about the outcomes of this particular research and how it will help policy decisions within the Department of Arts and Culture.
Well, we got about 600 responses from right across the sector. So the creative industries includes performing arts and crafts, museums, libraries, books and publishing, but then also more commercial sectors like design, creative services, audio, visual, and so on. So what our results showed was that there's a differential kind of impact on the sector. So the worst hit, or those who could continue with the least of their business during the shutdown, was performance and celebration. So this would be live music, theatre, festivals and fairs and so on. And they could really carry on with very little of their normal business activity. But then what was quite surprising for us was that the second hardest hit sector was the audio, visual and interactive media. So this is like TV and broadcasting, filming, and even podcasting. And we tend to think of those as being able to carry on because we can consume the content on TV or on the web or whatever. But making the content relies on getting together big, diverse teams of people to actually make that sector content, and also involves a lot of travel. So they were particularly hard hit. And then another sector that really is struggling is crafts, fine art and crafts. And although they can carry on producing things, and that is one of their strategies during the shutdown, a lot of the craft producers are informal, so they're not registered firms. They're individuals, so they're freelancers, own account workers with no employees, to use the official definition. So the 3 things that really affected how badly the sector was impacted were the mode of production, face-to-face production and consumption, the face-to-face ones being a worse hit, whether they were registered firms and could produce things like tax records and evidence of cancelled contracts, or if they were informal, and then finally how they were working. So if you were an employee, then you had more sort of stability than if you were just a freelancer and you relied on those short-term contracts.
So you have valued the impact at 53 billion. Are you able to, or were you mandated at all, to see how this figure counters the arts and the department's social relief programs in terms of how much they were giving out? Do these figures counter each other, or is one not related to the other?
Well, one's not really related to the other. The 53 billion is the average reduction in the output of the sector for the whole year, for 2020. And I mean, it's clear that we're not going to be able to make up that 53 billion in support to the sector. So some of what the survey asked about was how the sector was adapting. So what kind of strategies were people using in order to continue with their business? And there were quite some innovative ideas. I mean, a lot of people said we're moving online, moving our business online, we're working from home, we upskilling, so using the time to train, or if we have to, we're living on reserves, right? So that's a worry because it's not a sustainable kind of strategy if you have to rely on the reserves of your business. And some people said they were relying on their family or their friends to help support them during this time. But we've seen some really interesting kind of innovative adaptations. For example, some festivals have moved online. So where I am in Makanda, we have the National Arts Festival each year, for example, and this year it's being the virtual National Arts Festival. So it's a completely online kind of event. And this is a way that gives producers, artistic producers, a way to continue to earn some impact during the shutdown, and also gives audiences a chance to support the sector and to still get involved. But when we asked what kind of support would people find, or would the industry find the most useful, there is a need for a kind of direct financial support, at least in the short run, to help to pay for things like salaries and rent on business premises. But then there's also the request from the government to support the sector through the existing structures like the National Arts Council or the National Film and Video Foundation, to provide streaming platforms or to provide ways that the sector could continue to bid for projects and earn funding. And then also like longer term support, right? So as the crisis has gone on, we've kind of realized that it's not going to be just a short term thing. It might continue for some time. And so that means that we really need to look at how do we adapt business models in the sector to make the sector less vulnerable, but also to look at long-term sustainability.
You say that it's the most comprehensive study in the sector done so far. Why do you say that? And if it is, how will it impact the industry going forward for sustainability?
Well, we say the study is comprehensive because it covers the whole sector. So it's there have been other studies done, just for example, on the performing arts or on sectors like museums or books and publishing. So we tried to cover all the different parts of the sector. And also because we were using a macroeconomic model. So we were looking at the impact on the whole of the economy. So the direct impact, as you mentioned, is the 53 billion. But if we include the what are called the multiplier effect, so that is the impact of the creative industries on other parts of the economy through, for example, buying inputs, goods and services, employing people, kind of short-term contracts and so on, then that total impact is nearly 100 billion in 2020. But I must say that the economic impact is really only part of it, right? the main value of the sector, I think, is not necessarily in the jobs it creates or the money that it contributes, although those are important. It's in the kind of non-market benefits. So things related to, for example, building social cohesion, remembering our identity, building intercultural understanding, sometimes entertainment, right? And also that a lot of the sectors working in the non-profit organization or NGOs who are really supporting and servicing some of the poorest, most vulnerable communities. And so those kinds of contributions are equally important, if not more important, than the economic ones.
You hit it right on the head when you said that the value of this sector is not only in the numbers in that. People in the sector who are watching us now and thinking, it's all good and well, you've conducted the study, but I'm sitting here without an income, probably not having a place to stay or rental issues and with no food. What are the sort of responses we should be giving to them in this regard?
Well, part of what the Cultural Observatory tries to do and what we were doing with the study was to try and foreground what is happening, right? So to make it obvious what's happening. So we're hoping that the results of the study will be a kind of powerful incentive for government and also for other organizations to start thinking about how they can support the sector. And this has started happening. So we've seen increasing calls from national government, but also from local municipalities and from provincial governments to support the sector in commissioning works in this very difficult time. But it's not going to be enough, right? And so I think that one of the things that this crisis has made really kind of very obvious is how vulnerable workers in the creative sector are. And that's partly because all over the world, after the 2008-9 financial crisis, there was a kind of reduction in public funding for arts and culture. And that meant that a lot of people in the sector are working as freelancers. So they work from one short-term contract to the next. And that doesn't necessarily mean that they're earning low incomes or that they are, don't have good education. They can be very high income and education people, but they work in this very precarious way from one short-term contract to the next. So they don't have things like access to employer-supported medical aid or employer-supported pensions. And so when things go wrong, then those are the first contracts that are going to be ended or not renewed, leaving them without an income. So one of the things that was sort of been mentioned also in the revised white paper on arts and culture is that maybe we need to start thinking more systematically, like how can we support the sector through things like making freelancers having access to the unemployment insurance fund, or just finding ways of encouraging people who are working informally to actually formalize their business so that they've got things like tax records and contracts and so on that will allow them to access government support where that is available.
Where can people go if they want further information regarding these report outcomes?
Well, the report is already available on the South African Cultural Observatory website. So if you do a search for South African Cultural Observatory, you'll find it there straight away. And we've also made available things like summaries and graphics and PowerPoint slides that go with the report. So we'd be very happy if people would like to have a look at the results and use them perhaps in the way that they are trying to apply for extra support or motivating for funding.
Let's thank you again for your time this morning. Professor Jen Snowball is the SA Cultural Observatory Chief Research Strategist and also Economics Professor at Rhodes University. Thanks for talking to us this morning.
Thanks for having me.